Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I haven't held a mic in many, many years, so if you can't hear me, please just flag me down. I can see most of you, including those in the back. My name is Travis Newman. I'm an Associate Director of Sales at Viant Technology. Viant, just to give you a little bit more background on us, is a people-based advertising software which allows buyers to plan, execute, create, and measure their omnichannel digital advertising. Viant's proprietary first-party data is linked to 115 million US households, 257 million registered consumers, and is combined with access to more than 280,000 audiences via our one-to-one deterministic matches with 70-plus data partners. Our omnichannel DSP, Adelphic, allows advertisers to execute programmatic across TV, mobile, desktop, audio, digital out-of-home, and is the only DSP with IPv6 support for CTV environments. Here with me today is John Roman, Senior Director of Data and Technology at Chime, and we'll be talking about first-party data activation and measurement, of course, with being sensitive to any legalities. So, we've already kind of started off things really well. Google Chrome may never make up their mind, but when cookies are eventually deprecated, given Android's privacy sandbox, as well as Apple's privacy changes and so on, first-party data has clearly become a mainstream concern for marketers who have it, which I know a lot of you do here in the room. So today we'll be talking about your general point of view on first-party data collection, audience creation, and people-based measurement. So before we jump into our first question, why don't you introduce yourself and your role at Chime?
Sure. So John Roman, I've been at Chime for about 6 months now, formerly had a brief stint at SiriusXM until the amazing Chime opportunity came up. And then before that, Electronic Arts and Ancestry, a long media agency background. So that's kind of where I got my start in ad operations, and then moved over to ad and MarTech consultancy before making the switch brand side. So it's been an amazing career journey. I've just got to work with hundreds of different brands over the years, and then now I'm kind of entering the world of fintech, which has been exciting. Last time I did an in-person event like this, Game of Thrones was still like, I made a Game of Thrones joke, and that's how I know it's been a while, because I think we're all over the little, the Game of Thrones hype at this point.
I'm never over Game of Thrones, but
it's coming back. There are many new series coming back. Great. So super excited to be here. So over at Chime, I'm building out a brand new organization, MarTech, which is becoming more increasingly important for organizations to centralize their use of data and technology across all different marketing channels. So it's been really great to see the kind of rise of these organizations. There wasn't a name for it at some point. You saw these kind of desperate roles, and then now it's starting to have like a commonality in a term called MarTech. So very excited to be building out a brand new organization over at Chime, and there's so much to do, but it's been a great experience so far.
Awesome. So let's start with the basic question. Who is Chime? Who are your biggest competitors? Who is your consumer? Tell us a little bit more about the brand.
So I would say, if you think about our ecosystem, there are a number of other brands that kind of offer similar, that aren't big banks. I would say first and foremost, big banking is kind of like our biggest competitor. We kind of try to change the dynamic of what consumers need and what consumers are looking for, some of the challenges they've had with big banks, and then we try to incorporate, kind of things to alleviate that stress and that pressure, those fees, to help build consumer credit in a way that's, a little bit more streamlined and easy to access, especially for those in lower income brackets. So I would say big banking, and then we have a number of different kind of competitors in the landscape, but excited to say that we're kind of leading the charge from a banking alternative perspective. So we're in a good place.
Great. And just given the current environment, have any of your media strategies changed with talks of a potential recession, the Fed's increasing interest rates, et cetera?
Yeah, kind of figuring out how to bake in just general education and awareness into some of our media efforts and kind of content creation and things like that. Chime is really big at creating content that educates consumers about how they should be saving money, how they should be thinking about the environment around them. we're going into a recession. How do you manage a recession, kind of leveraging Chime to help you out along the way, but just generally giving advice to different consumers to do that. So I've been having a lot of talks recently about like kind of the intersectionality of content creation and then kind of promoting the product that, of the brand that you're working for, and doing it in a way where it doesn't seem like you're forcing a sort of product down your consumer's throat. It's more about, hey, here's some really great and relevant information. Here's how our product blends into that. But kind of finding that dynamic is great, especially, dealing with recessions, dealing with just other issues that consumers face in the market when it comes to saving, building their credit, all that good stuff. So yeah, that's kind of how we're doing it today.
Right. Given programmatic is my expertise and content creation is most definitely not, can you share a little bit more about what that means exactly and what kind of activations you've been doing to, put that message across?
Yeah, programmatic's been tough. I know from a measurement perspective, especially like programmatic display, that's been an area where it's more of a mid-funnel tactic, and there's a lot of challenges measuring when it's not last touch, right? So I think that's something we're going to be discussing and moving a little bit more into. A lot of conversation about how we measure the success of entering into new channels like that, but programmatic kind of connected TV and digital video has been huge, and that's something that we're actively exploring now. It's a little bit of the shift in the marketplace. A lot more brands are moving over to video, so yeah, that's something we are already doing, but we'll probably lean a little bit more into because it has worked really well for us in the past.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. We'll get into the measurement piece for sure. I really want to dig into that technically. But before, so let's talk about your general point of view on first-party data collection, audience creation, just given these, general changes within our marketplace. What are you doing? How are you making sure it's safe? How are you activating? Just tell me a little bit more about your suite and your point of view on that. Change. Yeah,
so coming into Chime, I think this has been kind of a similar experience for a lot of different organizations I've entered into, is in a stage where, they're rapidly expanding. They're expanding their media efforts and capabilities. That's one of the reasons I was brought in. And one of the things that we're trying to achieve is just more agile media activations. And with that, from a historical perspective, you still have a lot of brands that are building out kind of manual audience segmentation, piping that into platforms very manually. So some of you in the room may actually experience this today where, you need a new audience built or you need new optimization signals passed into a platform like Facebook or Google. And you have to have that kind of conversation with your data engineering team. It's kind of a big to-do. And sometimes it could take, weeks to months to enable. So one of the first things I focused on is thinking about how can we democratize our data? How can we move away from having to kind of work in a manual fashion that goes into customer data platforms? So it's kind of a buzzword. Everything's a CDP these days. I'm a CDP, I guess. Sure, I'd be a very bad CDP. To be like, give me a list of all these audience members. I'd be like, I don't really remember their name, but if you give me a picture, I can kind of I'll tell you if I know them or not. That would be me as a CDP. But CDPs are extremely important. That's been outside of data cleanup exercises, and I'll talk a little bit more about the foundational support you should be building before you bring in a highly expensive and sometimes enterprise-like tool like a CDP. It just puts the power back into the marketer's hands. You have access to all your data in a no-code way where you can assemble the audiences you want, distribute those seamlessly through integrations with your numerous partners, and then moving away from how we were operating previously of manual pipelines, manual audience requests, things like that. So that's been a really big focus for me.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. And runs me right into the next question. So we're talking CDPs. Let's talk about clean rooms, crosswalks.
I love it.
What have you been doing in terms of measurement? How have you been working with your partners to build crosswalks? Do you have partners who are passing back exposure log level data? What does that look like? What's your point of view? What are you looking to build?
Yeah, we are building up a robust, just kind of data ingestion engine. So we have so many different sources of data, and we have an amazing marketing analytics team that kind of wrangles all that data. They transform it. They create stories, with all of the data we can provide. But it's been a challenge in certain environments, as you know, especially with the move away from third-party cookies. That's pretty much completely dead at this point. Chrome changes are coming next year, I believe, at this point. So it's like whatever's left there. And then just kind of working with, more aggregated data, more model data. So we've been relying a lot on our numerous partners and vendors to help us along the way. I think organizations are still struggling to figure out, like, how do we measure the same way we were able to measure, even 5 years ago? And it's okay to not have all the answers. As an industry, I think we're still trying to figure it out completely, but we've been moving away more from things like attribution. It's been very hard to do things like attribution and really encompass all of your media into that. MMM is still working pretty good for us. So we're kind of relying on that and a lot of incrementality testing to show effectiveness in different channels. If we're spending more media dollars in a certain area, or if we're entering into something new, that's been kind of our go-to for the time being. And that's kind of been the general sentiment, I think, across, the marketing landscape is like lean more into incrementality to showcase success.
If I hear incrementality one more time, I might burst. So tell us a little bit about incrementality. So when you are running more upper funnel channels, such as CTV or even digital out of home, if that's ever been of interest, how are you tying that back to an incremental DR-based metric, such as signups or page views?
Yeah, so that's it's still something where we've been relying a lot on modeling. We don't have, as a lot of financial institutions have this kind of restriction, the ability to tag and measure across every step of the funnel. So in certain cases, we're having to use a lot of predictive conversion kind of estimations and modeling run by our marketing analytics team to see, did something actually drive impact? And then trying to use user graphs to tie back that data. Was this the same person who interacted with this video that is now converting on our site? Because there are kind of gaps in measurement now from when a user maybe viewed something to us being able to track a conversion on our pages or our app or whatever environment we're trying to track that conversion event. So still a challenge. It's not as good as it was back when we had access to more direct information and the ability to tag everything. But we're still learning on that front as well, for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you for my perfect segue. I am a salesperson, so I must give a quick pitch. So one of our main differentiators in the market is that we have a proprietary household identifier called the Viant Household ID. With this identifier and with our total graph, we can tie more upper funnel channels such as CTV back to our Viant Household ID, back through our graph, and tie it back to an actual DR-based metric through our incrementality study. And John and I just met yesterday, so I promise he didn't set me up purposely. This is organic, but just something to know, just in terms of what's proprietary to us and something that's really been working across our advertisers, especially with fintech and financial-based advertisers. So I want to make sure I leave time for questions, but one thing I definitely wanted to ask a little bit more about is how you're building out your team. You have built your team from the ground up. When it comes to this data infrastructure, this measurement infrastructure, what does that look like and what are your goals?
Yeah, I think I've always been in an interesting place because a lot of times that I've entered into organizations that have built out marketing technology functions, the large focus has been on lifecycle or kind of just CRM and member communications and things like that. I come from a heavy paid media background, so trying to incorporate that into my MarTech team to cover off on all channels and understand the intricacies of activating media outside of our own walls, which can be quite complex, and we don't always have control over what we can and cannot do, what data we pass back into these platforms. So I brought on a lot of talent that's highly technical, but also has a lot of relevant experience, both in CRM, but then also paid media. And they understand how to set certain things up within Facebook, within Google. I should be saying Meta, sorry. Let's go back. Let's scrub the records. I'll dub over all of the Facebook mentions and redub it over with Meta.
Cancel
Sorry, Meta.
the recording.
I think Meta's here. Sorry. Just to make sure that we are bringing on tools and technologies that support our numerous channels, and then working really closely with teams. So maybe future state, we'll be one big happy family internally, but the teams that are building out technology internally. So we've had a heavy input, just like me and my team, in terms of guiding what the features should be when you're thinking about building out technology internally versus going with a third party. Because I've also experienced a lot of organizations that want to build everything, which can be good in some cases. In other cases, you want to ask questions like, how long is this going to take? Is there a single point of failure? If somebody is responsible for building this thing in-house and then they leave the organization, is somebody else going to be able to pick it up and go with it? That's why I tend to, depending on the stage of the company, lean more towards third-party providers, but then making sure you have a team that has engineering experts to be able to set that stuff up for you is also very important. You want to avoid sometimes you're paying millions of dollars for these tools, and if you don't have the right engineers, you don't have the right support internally that's going to actually integrate the stuff the way it should be, you're not going to get a lot of value out of those tools. So that's kind of the centralization of the team is including like engineering resources. We have a lot of really smart media strategists and tech strategists. And then marketing analytics, just kind of measuring for success and figuring out how we leverage our data.
Yeah, arguably the most important department of any media strategy. Okay, so let's open it up. We have 5 minutes. Are there any questions for John or I?
About the new season of Game of Thrones? The new series? There's 2. Oh, yes.
I was going to ask just balance of personalization. Like, it's a lot of work to get the content for one-on-one marketing.
Yes.
And then you're obviously tying your data for it. Oh, sorry, Keith Bendy is with Linkia. So how is it work? Are you seeing the returns when you are doing targeting, or if you do broad-based targeting, is the juice worth the squeeze?
Yeah, there's a fine line. So I would say like test, and I don't know if we had that on the doc to talk about like how important it is to have a separate testing bucket, especially as it comes to like personalization initiatives. There's a fine line there. You want to be personalized without being creepy. And then what is considered creepy is different if you're doing internal communications via like, let's say like a life cycle email message, right? Consumers expect you to have a little bit more information on them if it's a communication coming from the company versus targeting somebody like with an ad on Facebook, right? Which can be, Meta, which could be creepy if it has way too much personalized content in it. So we always test into these things whenever we're trying a new bout of personalization. Now we're targeting and leaning more into omni-channel personalization, which is more challenging than ever. But we have some great platforms that help enable that, like Braze. It's a matter of just making sure that you are understanding how to measure and see that lift when you're doing more personalized experiences. And then content is big for that too. Like, how are you building your content? Is it meaningful to the customer experience? And then how are you adding personalization to make that even better? So, cool.
Go ahead.
John, I'd just love to hear how you're enjoying and transitioning to the financial services category.
Yeah.
And Chime being a really awesome challenger brand. Do you see that as an advantage vis-a-vis the more established financial services?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Do you see being a challenger brand where, a new brand, disruptive brand coming into a very established category, banks, financial institutions that have been around for a long time, is that an advantage, especially maybe with targeting younger folks?
Yeah, absolutely. You have a lot of kind of historical information to work with when you're building a brand like Chime, just in the things that maybe some of the larger competitor in the space isn't doing exactly right for the consumer. So it does come with its own advantages. It can also be more tricky just to get people and convince people to kind of leverage your product versus a traditional bank that they've always used, or, even parents, grandparents have used. So I think from a younger consumer standpoint, there are a lot of younger consumers, especially those that are just starting to build their credit score, folk in college, that really appreciate having alternatives because they've been burned by big banking. Overdraft fees. I remember when I was younger, when I was in high school, I would get those insane overdraft fees with my old school bank for buying like a pack of gum. And then, but at the end of the day, I was working at Staples as like selling printers at the time. HP printers, shout out to HP, favorite brand. And sometimes the overdraft fees would be my entire paycheck. So I think, a lot of the younger consumers are just understanding they have options now. They don't need to necessarily go with historical banks. There's a lot of comparing and contrasting too. So just making sure the value proposition is there is extremely important. And that's why we try to incorporate that through our advertising. Say that.
Maybe have time for one last quick question.
One more?
Yes.
So Alex from Visera. Maybe my question sounds ignorant, but I will ask it anyway.
Sure.
Elon Musk recently backed off from his purchase of Twitter.
Yeah, I was reading about that.
Bots and so on and so on. So what is your view on bots taking away marketing dollars from advertisers on social platforms, on Google and so on?
Oh, like the whole bot fraud and just like, yeah. Ooh, that's always been a challenge. So I've seen kind of over the years, the change of having to have a third-party verification provider to a lot of platforms like Meta, I got it right this time, and Google building in their own bot fraud mechanisms directly into the platform. So with the inability to measure directly on a lot of these platforms, Twitter is included on that to verify if like a human being is actually viewing your advertising. We're now in a place where we are more reliant on those platforms specifically and trusting of them to scrape that fraudulent behavior away specifically. So it's two-tier. We also have our own kind of fraud that we have to worry about as a banking alternative, where you have, people that aren't who they say they are trying to sign up for accounts, or bots trying to sign up for accounts and things like that. So we try to apply that into our media to make sure, like as a suppression tactic, just to make sure we're not targeting things that we know or users we know are bots. And then working with third-party verification providers, they are a good supplementary kind of way to examine if you're experiencing a lot of fraudulent behavior, but a lot of that data is coming directly from these walled gardens. So it's a good thing to examine, ask questions about, look at the data. You can usually separate how much of that data was fraudulent from the providers themselves. But I think that's still very much a challenge, as we have less direct access to that data to measure ourselves. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for the time. Thank you, John, for joining me.
Thank you.